Right. So it's now a few minutes after 2, and so I'd like to officially start this session. All around the world, we see growing issues with waste and climate change. With the global population set to hit 9 billion by 2050, the demand for our resources increases exponentially. We are in need of a new economic model. The middle class is set to top 5 billion by 2030, and many emerging nations will look for increased prosperity. This is putting enormous stress on our environment and our resources, which are becoming more difficult to extract. Our short sighted focus on producing and consuming as cheaply as possible has created a linear economy in which objects are briefly used and then discarded as waste. Looking beyond the current take, make, waste, extractive industrial model, a circular economy aims to redefine growth, focusing on positive society wide benefits. It involves gradually reducing dependency on finite resources and designing waste out of the system. Underpinned by transition to renewable energy resources, the circular model builds economic, natural, and social capital. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Tejas Ganigar, and I'll be your MC for this session on circular economies. I'm in grade 12 at the International School of Zug and Lucerne and have been a member of YFS for 3 years, and this year I've been part of the series team. Today's event evaluates the benefits of a circular economy and the challenges we face in implementing it. The circular economy is a concept currently promoted by the EU, by several national governments, including China, Japan, and the UK, as well as by various businesses around the world. We are joined today by experts from multiple fields, all implementing the value of circular economies into their work, and will be discussing how we can integrate these values into our lives. It is my great pleasure to welcome Alice Kasaragi to our event. He's a co-founder of Future Urban Living, a company combining systemic design and business strategy to help businesses and brands become circular by design. She's a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Shaper Milan Hub and Al Gore's Climate Reality Leader. We are also joined by Margot Camus, who is also a part of the World Economic Forum's Global Shaper community, with a background in marketing and communications. He works for Adidas in their global brand communications team, with a focus on sustainability projects. He has worked with leading brands across fashion, looking at social impact, sustainability, and retail. And last but not the least, we have Nicholas Freudiger. He's the founder of ID Geneva Watches, a startup focusing on creating watches from reused materials and base their business on a circular economic model, and have been able to crowdfund over 300,000 francs for their project so far. We have about 45 minutes together, during which time we will be holding a panel-style discussion with our speakers. Please feel free to use hashtag YFSCirc on Twitter. I repeat that, hashtag YFSCIRC on Twitter to share any questions with us, and I will ask them to our speakers towards the end of the session. As a team, we hope that our time together today represents an opportunity to hear from and interact with leading changemakers and inspiring experts so we can take action to better society. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our host and interviewer for the session, David Fankhauser.
Thanks, Tejas. As you said, I'm David and I'm in grade 10. This is my second year in the YFS team, and it's my great pleasure to welcome today's speakers in this YFS panel. As we heard from Tejas' introduction, it's a real privilege to be able to spend some time with professionals from this field. Now, I suggest let's not waste any time and get right into the circular economy. To start off, Ms. Camus, as we heard from your short bio, you are now part of a movement towards sustainability within large fashion brands like Adidas. Why is making an effort in fashion particularly important?
That's a great question to kick off. And before we go into that, I just want to give an overview of what sustainability in the fashion industry is. So in my opinion, sustainability in fashion is one that balances people, planet, and profit. And I always like to say that sustainability isn't like, it's not binary. It's not you're unsustainable and then you're sustainable the next day. It's really a journey. And in the fashion industry, it means an approach that looks at the whole end-to-end of the supply chain of a product. So how it's designed and made, who's making it, how it's transported, how it's used and how durable it is, and then what happens to that product at the end of its life. And so this is super important because the fashion industry is actually the second most polluting industry in the world and one of the most wasteful. So 20% of waste in the world comes from the fashion and textile industry. So we have to do better. And it produces 1.2 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions. And in terms of the people and how we're involved in the industry, hopefully we all have clothes and we all buy clothes. So we're all consumers and we're all involved in making an impact in the industry. And also in terms of workers, approximately 1 in 8 workers worldwide is involved in some way in the fashion and textile industry. And so there's a lot of impacts, whether we realize it or not, whether we can say the name of the person who actually made our clothes or not, that we should all worry about and that we should all play a part in improving as well.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something interesting looking at. We might not think about it as much, but as individuals, we're all consuming every day. There's always something. We use our iPhones, our technology, but we also have clothes and many other things. So it's important to think about that as well. Tying into kind of the fashion industry, the watchmaking industry is very well established and competitive in Switzerland, with so many famous brands like Rolex, Tissot, Omega, and Patek Philippe, and many more. Mr. Freudiger, how did you find your niche in this market, and what inspired you to find a sustainable watch business specifically?
As you mentioned, David, watchmaking is the third biggest industry in Switzerland, which is huge. When I look at it, for me, it's about passion, it's about heritage, tradition. But we're with our brand, with our identity, what we're aiming at is that we actually started in 2020. So we have actually this hashtag called Zero Heritage. We don't have an heritage, so we start with a sort of a white page, and this sort of gives us the responsibility to rethink the value chain and deep dive into the value chain and sort of try to enhance it. I think this is the role of startups, and I think it's positive that every industry, even as big as the watchmaking industry in Switzerland, have startups present in the market.
Yeah. And how supportive is the watch market towards sustainable concept? Because we know there's so many brands, but very few of them actually have kind of sustainability as their main aspect.
Exactly. Even than just being sustainable, I think circular economy is about the ecosystem you build around your product, and not only about the object itself. I think it goes beyond that, and I think this is going to be a huge topic we can discuss as well with the other panelists. How can you be more sustainable than the product itself? I remember this sentence that said, that circularity is sort of the super league of sustainability, and I think this is what we're aiming at. Is not only about providing a strap made out of recycled PET or just the packaging made out of recycled PET, but it's about the whole ecosystem around the watch. When we talk about materials, I just give you an example of a material that is not 100% circular, which is recycled PET. We're focusing on stainless steel for us at ID Genève, which is 100% recyclable and 100% recycled on our watches. That's just one particular point.
Ms. Kasiragi, in what ways is the digital space kind of different to the fashion area, kind of with clothing and that, but also the watchmaking industry?
That's a good question. Well, I think the fashion industry and the digital space can be compared in terms of material waste being created. Clothing, fast fashion, and also electronics, they all share the planned obsolescence of goods. So I buy a computer, I buy a phone as much as I buy a skirt or a t-shirt, and then after 1 year, after 2 years, there's a new one, there's a new fashion. The fashion dynamics make it so that I must need something different every year, and the technology dynamics are the same every year. there's a new update, and it's never interoperable. It's usually a complete new version of the phone. And then you have closed systems like Apple, where they take back the old one, and hopefully they will be in charge of separating the parts and recycling it. And that would be their advantage to reuse the materials, because it's also an economic advantage for the company. But then there's also semi-interoperable markets like Android, like other types of phones, like the Chinese um, technology markets, where the materials are like the devices are left to like the responsibility of the municipality that has to take back all the electronic waste. And also both the electronics and fashion, they use materials and put together materials that cannot be easily separated afterwards. This might be worse in fashion than in electronics, because you can like it's harder to separate the tiny pieces in the devices, but easier than removing dye and plastic from a natural fabric, basically. But the digital world can also help this kind of problem, and I'm talking about software now, not about hardware. It can help because it can help tracing materials and making sure that materials are treated in a fair way, that there's a fair distribution of raw materials, or there's there's we can trace how materials are being recycled, and that their properties are still very valuable for both the fashion and the technology industry. So the moment you can trace things through digital technologies, then it really makes it easier to implement a circular economy, I think.
Yeah, I think planned obsolescence was one of the main ideas I had in my notes kind of to talk about today. So I'm happy we kind of got into this at the beginning already, because that's something when I was researching the circular economy, that's something that I encountered a lot, I think, in respects to products like also not just Apple, but Starbucks. If you think about it, the people that go to Starbucks every morning to get Mr. Freudiger, in what ways do you think we can work to eliminate these types of products? How can we stop companies from coming up with ideas that get their buyers to come to them again and again and again? What can we do against that?
I think here it's about changing the whole business model. Of course, it takes time. I think I really like what Marcos said before, that it's a journey in terms of sustainability. You don't become sustainable in one day, or you don't do something like create a startup based in circular economy. For us, I give you an example. Our mission is to manufacture watches 100% sourced from the circular economy. This is our vision, but I mean, it's step by step, every day,
Yes.
daily, meeting and collaborating, I think, with corporates or even other startups working on materials. This is really our aim, and I think it's about the objective, and then just enjoying the journey towards that objective. I think circular economy, I always say it's two words, circular and economy. And for me, the circular is really a reminder that everything around us, humans being, works in circle. And this is a really gentle reminder that to be really focused on this, and really not to push the product outside of the manufacturer, and stop being responsible. I think this is the first aspect, and it goes beyond the value of the company, but it's really about the creator of the product, the creator of the company, and they're all humans beings behind that, and we really need to put a focus back on that. And then there's the second term, which is about economy. It's about creating value for the end consumer, and making sure as well the business model stays viable, so it's about different revenue streams. We just talked about the subscription model before, right, with the other panelists. It's about creating this ecosystem for our watches. It's about having circular coins, having a digital platform, thinking the product in terms of design for disassembly. That really gives the opportunity for our ambassador to come back to us and sort of change different aspects of the watches, sort of the lateral size of the watches, the straps, the bezel, and the dial color. is really about focusing on the surfaces, which is something different. It's not about repurchasing another watch, but we want to showcase that we can still actually generate other revenue streams with this digital platform.
Yeah. And speaking of like changing the kind of approach by design, how do you think it's different in terms of we have these big national companies like Apple, Starbucks, Samsung, and so many more? How can we get them to also work towards it? Of course, some of them have some small initiatives that are starting to grow as well, but how can we motivate them to take larger steps as well?
I think I'll then give the word perhaps to Margot here on that one, because she's
Yeah, I think
working for Adidas. But just on my side, because my background is from Coca-Cola Switzerland, and I think we were very much influenced by startups from the drinks industry, and we were always looking at new business model. I think we underestimate the impact of young entrepreneurs that are launching as well a new business model. And I think this is the role of startup in 2021. But I'll give you the floor to Margot as well on that point.
Yeah, so I think we have to remember that businesses wouldn't exist without consumers. And at the end of the day, businesses are just people, behind the four walls. It's people like you and me, and hopefully you guys as students in the future that will go in and be future business leaders. So for me, it's important in a business to work with like-minded people that are passionate about sustainability. So I think companies need to prioritize hiring and bringing in people that will make change, that will ask questions, that will really dig into, this is how it's always been done, but why don't we do things better, and have circularity enticed. So how about if instead of, KPIs around how much we sell, it's like, how circular can we get our products? You really start getting people to be incentivized to think in that way. And I think companies that give people the time and space to innovate. So if I was told, okay, you can spend one day a week just focusing on how we can be more circular as a business, I think businesses would really get much further than if they're just, and that's really where it comes into balancing people, planet, and profit. And I do think that for businesses to be successful in the future and competitive and be able to attract the best people, they have to be able to do that. And then from the consumer end of us as people consuming things, I think we're very powerful and we're a collective, and we should really prioritize in terms of what brands we support, and we should really understand and read the labels and understand how things are made. And when you're buying something, understand, does this brand, is this making a product durable that I can wear time and time again and pass it down, or is it poorly made, and is it made just to use once and then never wear again? So it's about supporting businesses, for example, like B Corps or fair trades or other sustainable and circular businesses that that align to our values and ethics and morals around businesses that are doing good in the world.
Thank you. At this point, I'd just like to remind everyone in the audience to use hashtag YFSCirc, so CIRC, just to submit any questions so we can go through those and we can ask as many of them to our panelists at the end of this session. In that way, you can also bring in your own interests. So next, I'd like to move on with Ms. Kasiragi about the role of governments. Do you think, as you've worked in the space with government as well for the Italian government, do you think governments should incentivize businesses, like Margot mentioned earlier, to become more sustainable, or do you think that will happen on its own?
Yes, no, 100%. I think switching from a linear to circular economy, it means like really changing the economic model. It's not a walk in the park. It's basically changing everything we know, starting from the education, starting from the idea that waste is a material, is not waste. Like if I can make money out of waste instead of spending for getting rid of that waste, so spending money, that is the change that needs to happen. And so you need to have both citizens and businesses and the government aligned. And I think businesses are going towards that direction. Citizens are already there. People already want sustainable services and businesses and products. It's just that they don't have a big voice in the game, or they don't know how to voice their thoughts most of the times. And then you would have the government. And I was part of this task force to digitalize the Italian government and introduce like the idea of open source and collaborative models. And that was really eye-opening for me, because I realized when the government intentions are aligned with this kind of operations, it makes everything so much easier. There's many ways a government could support a circular shift. For example, through taxes, you can incentivize certain behaviors. You can basically provide tax cuts to companies that use renewable energies or that reuse materials. You can remove the tax cuts that are applied nowadays in Europe to fossil fuels, which is a very outdated model. You can provide better, like facilitated access to tenders for companies that prove to be sustainable or circular. Limit the choice of suppliers for companies that are owned partly by the state, so for example, the energy companies. There's like different ways of like managing the access to credit for companies, or also companies that want to be listed in the stock markets, then they need to pass certain requirements of sustainability. In these many ways, the companies would see an incentive. If these companies, private companies, want to work with the government or want to become partly state-owned company or want to participate to tenders to bids, this all goes through the government's decision. And I think the European Union is doing a great job at the moment by supporting both the circular and digital innovation. And so I hope that we'll see these happening in this year and the next 2-3 years in all the countries of Europe.
Are there any countries in particular that you find are leading the way in terms of policies or things that motivate businesses to make this step, or?
Yes. So again, it's different. I think it depends on what are the priorities of every government. I would say it's easier to implement more drastic solution in the Nordics because you would have less people to convince, just in general, and the governments are way more stable. So if you like Norway, the crown of the royals of Norway just decided to defund all the fossil fuels companies they used to invest in, for example. Then there's a lot of experimentation in terms of circular economy in Netherlands or in Denmark. There's this Kalundborg Industrial Symbiosis District that has been happening for the last 50 years in Denmark. And as I said this morning in the other panel, Milan is leading the way in the food policies and sustainable food policies. So it really depends on the city and the level of maturity that the city has reached. There are some cities that are evolving much faster than others, and those cities usually have less regard for climate solutions because they need to first stabilize themselves and then dive deeper into the sustainability aspect.
Yeah. I think one aspect I'd like to talk about is a factor that I think can kind of hinder sustainable products sometimes, which is just as an example, if I walk into H&M, just as an example of a store, I can buy a cheap t-shirt for as little as 6 to 7 francs or euros. But if I want a sustainable t-shirt that is really branded of being sustainable cotton or something like that, it can cost 2 to 3 times that amount. And I'd like to direct this to both Ms. Camus and Mr. Freudiger. Do you think that these prices are justified? And if so, do you see a future where these products become more accessible?
Yeah, so I can jump on this one first. So there's an amazing documentary that I recommend all of you watch called The True Cost. And it talks about exactly this. So I think fast fashion, where you feel like you have to buy clothes all the time at really cheap prices, the challenge there is that then you lose the value of clothes. So if you can buy something at only a few euros, you wear it once, it rips because, you know, corners are being cut to make it that price. you have this disposable mentality. Like nowadays, a lot of clothes is produced in this way. But if you look 50, 60, 70 years ago, people bought clothes only a handful of times a year. It was all made locally by their local tailors. Maybe I would actually go and select the material. Like nowadays, people have no idea what they're even wearing or where it's even made. So there's this disconnect that's happening that's allowed this to happen in the first place. And what the documentary argues and uncovers is that actually that cost isn't being passed on to us as consumers, but that cost goes somewhere, and it goes in general to the people making the clothes that aren't getting paid a fair wage. They're not getting paid something that they can live with dignity on. So if we look at it in terms of paying more, that's how it always was. And things have changed because of globalization, and I know developing economies now looking at manufacturing clothes. But the true cost is passed on to the people and also our environment by cutting corners, by using toxic chemicals and dyes. So I think at the end of the day, we have to look at the wider picture. And also, I think the most sustainable thing you can do is go and buy pre-loved or do a clothes swap with your friends. So it doesn't always have to be about I have to buy something new, but actually the most sustainable thing is to use something that you already have or that's already existing in our ecosystem.
I'm going to as well try to answer your question, David. First of all, I agree on the true cost. I think as a consumer, every day you make choices on the 1 franc you spend on that product or the other one. And I think this is an important decision, and it's actually influencing or encouraging an industry towards a better or worse situation. So think about it like this. I always like to think it like this. And if you buy a t-shirt in Switzerland for 5 francs, it cannot be real, you know. You know what I mean? I mean, we know the cost of living in Switzerland. I mean, come on. Everything is expensive here. So 5 francs, the true cost is somewhere else. You don't see it, but it's happening. And I think this is very important to notice it and sort of tackle it. And as Margot said, after that, I mean, a 5 franc t-shirt will last what? Okay, 6 to 12 months. Okay, so think about it actually in an economic perspective for your own actually self. You know, just buying a t-shirt that is actually better quality, better as well social, or what we call social equity that is there. I think this is much better even for yourself. That's what we lost. We sort of disconnected. I really like this word about disconnection, and I like as well a word that we mention a lot when we talk about our watches, which is about conscious consumption. It's really about being conscious of what you purchase and why you do it. And I think this is very important in terms of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think when we buy products, in a lot of cases, it's kind of ignorance or not really thinking about the story behind those products that doesn't allow us to think of those stories and what could actually be happening behind the scenes. For these kind of last few minutes before we delve into the Q&A later on, I kind of want to transition into more of the concrete steps that we can take as individuals, but also as groups to kind of make steps towards the circular economy. And as this is a very new concept, I'd like to ask Ms. Kasiragi, what does the future look like to you? What steps towards the circular economy do you hope for us to make in the, say, next 20 years?
I would say one thing that is also related to the question that you asked before about like what's the true cost of things. I think we tend to be a bit impatient. I tend to be impatient, and I'm like, okay, this is the year for like circular economy. Everything needs to change, and then the true changes take longer. And to be fair, you will still see those cheap T-shirts in the shops for a while because we will need to get used to this next iteration. Like we're still seeing the effect of an economy that was born after the World War, where we had to rebuild. So it's been like 70 years and we're still there basically. And so, I mean, I think we need to just evolve slowly. Most of the times when we start working with clients, then we already go into the strategy, and then we don't realize that we need to start from the basic education. And we need to start on the fact that all our minds and the client's minds, and they know they all need to be aligned on the same topic, and the same topic, that is waste, is actually something we can that we can leverage to provide new products and new services. And we were talking this morning again about this idea of like coping nature, and like maybe just taking a moment to reflect. And as like we had this experience of the pandemic where we had to stop and think about where are we going and what is wrong, and also how is the pandemic linked to the pollution and the way we use natural resources. And maybe we should like really take a longer moment to reflect on the situation, instead of like pursuing this idea of just profits that doesn't really make people happy. And so copying nature in the processes and understanding how nature can reuse everything and do it at their own favor without producing any kind of waste, for example. So I would want to see this switch, and to see more people becoming braver in the job they do every day and start saying this is not right. And you just don't have to go and talk to your boss and say like what you've done in the last 30 years is wrong, because it was something that happened because of a context in which that business evolved, and now the times are ready for a different type of business. Then let's go and be brave about this change, like without denying everything that was done before. If I'm here today talking about the circular economy, it's because I saw something that was not right, and it made me want to change it, basically.
Yeah, thank you. I think that those are really powerful words. Um, Something that we discussed earlier, Margot and I also, was Patagonia being a company kind of that we can look up to in terms of sustainability, and them leading the way in steps that companies can take in unconventional ways, maybe telling their customers not always to buy unless they really need it, and to consider, yeah, do I really need to buy a new jacket now? Do I really need to get a new pair of hiking boots or whatever? Um, do you think this is the way to go, Miss Camus? And can they be a role model for other companies to follow suit?
Yeah, so first of all, I love Patagonia and what they stand for, and it was very bold for them as a consumer products company to come out and say, "Do not buy this jacket." And they had a full ad in a magazine with this very thought-provoking statement. I think Patagonia is a total leader in the industry, but it's also quite expensive, so it's not accessible to everyone, perhaps. And a good tip I would have is there's an app I used to work with these guys. They're called Good on You. And they actually do all the hard work for you. They find all of these amazing sustainable businesses and have this ranking, and they give you more insight into the different brands and what they're doing in terms of sustainability. So if you want to find some brands to support, that's a really good place to start. But I think brands like this are needed, and they're pioneering what the future of consumers will look like and will ask for. The irony, though, is if you go to New York on Wall Street, you hear and you see a bunch of bankers that wear Patagonia vests. So, but that's good in a way that, yes, it's a bit of an irony in the sense that maybe they don't really care about the messaging and it's cool. But having brands like that come to the surface and be cool means that people are having these conversations and people are becoming aware. Like when I met my partner, he had no idea about sustainability. He was a banker, and now he's really invested and involved, because it's just about understanding and about learning that this is about all of us. This affects all of us, and it affects our future leaders, you guys, and it affects the planet we want to live on. And I want to look back one day and be really proud of the work that I'm doing. So I think, yeah, there's definitely amazing brands out there that are pioneering, and Patagonia is one of the many that are doing great things in this space.
Mm-hmm. I think one last question I'd like to ask to end this part of the panel off is kind of what can people like me, just sitting here and listening to you from around the world, what can I and others do in our everyday lives to make a step towards the circular economy? What can we do while shopping, while doing other things, just conscious decisions in our life? Maybe Mr. Freudiger, you could start on this, and just so the viewers really have a takeaway from this discussion that they can take home with them.
I think I would sum it up with two words. Like really be curious. I think curiosity has led me to what I'm doing right now. Look at for some niche. I think I really love Patagonia, what they're doing as well. I think every industry can be better. Sometimes they ask me about watchmaking. Why am I sort of bridging that to sort of a eco-responsible product? Is it really something you need in 2021? My answer is yes. We need watches, we need fashion, we need love. And really, it's about really every industry making a step better towards a better sustainability. So don't be afraid to tackle an industry. I mean, you guys are the new generation, and I think it's about tackling an industry where you're passionate about an object, about a hobby, about a culture, about something, and making it better towards towards that direction.
I think I wanted to add something to what Nicolas said, because I really love the idea of like being curious. I think this should be the guiding message, especially in the Western world, where we have this kind of mentality that the way we do things is the right way to do things, and it can be applied to everyone in the world. And it doesn't really make sense. I lived 5.5 years in China, and then I realized there's many other ways of doing things, and this is really the essence of being curious. Like if you like use deodorant every day and then you discover that there's a stone that is a deodorant, or that in Thailand there is a soap made of mangosteen that you can use instead of deodorant, and there's like it's a soap, it's not even a spray, you don't have to produce it, it's just made of natural materials. And maybe in Southern Europe that there's this other method to do it, and in the Nordics is different as well. Like just really be curious about, never settle for the way things are done, and try to explore and contextualize.
And
I
for
think
me, adding on to everything you guys have said, which is super spot on, it's be curious and find something that resonates with you, because the world of sustainability and circularity is quite broad. But maybe, doing some research, you can find something that you feel really passionate about, whether it's companies that are, supporting local social causes, or companies that are innovating with waste, or companies that are carbon offsetting, or companies that are female or minority led, or companies that are disrupting something that previously was quite negative. So find something that really resonates with you and start learning about that, because what you'll find is that this world, it's all interconnected, and one thing results in something else, and then you'll start learning and learning more, and hopefully changing how you view things and how you approach this topic as a whole in your lives as well.
Yeah, I feel that's an awesome takeaway. Just be curious to everyone at that. I like how you all kind of mirrored that sentiment. And I think that's a great way to end kind of this discussion part of the panel. So to finish off, we're going to go through some of the questions from the audience asked over Twitter through hashtag YFSCirc. And to the audience, feel free to keep submitting questions as we ask these as well, but I'm going to hand it over to Tejas at this point.
Thank you, David. Our Twitter hashtag has been very active, and we have received plenty of thought-provoking questions over the past 30 minutes. But I would like to begin this off by asking a question from Donald. How could the circular economy be integrated into areas like agriculture, where maybe it's not really as integrated, or you don't have a lot of discussion in those areas? So how would you think about that? I'd like to start off with Alice, because you said you worked in government, so I feel that would have like a really tight integration.
The first startup I worked for, I used to support startups as a freelancer. The first startup is called the Hydroplan, and they still live today, and their business is thriving because they're using sensors, so the digital world, to trace how much water is being used for irrigation systems, and they're able to reduce up to like 90% of the water that's needed for irrigating vineyards and apple trees and pear trees, and I think this is really surprising. I mean, as Margot said, like you can really apply circular economy and sustainability to many things. And in reality, it's really about being curious, because circular economy doesn't only mean that you have to circulate resources constantly, but you have to reduce and maybe to substitute one resource with something else that is that is more sustainable. And there's like this startup in Kenya that uses, because there's no sewage systems in Kenya, because there's not enough water and investment to build sewage system at the state level, they use human waste to make fertilizer for agriculture. And so people that didn't know how to dispose of their waste now get an income from it because they can sell it to make fertilizer. I mean, there's so many ideas. Like, I could talk for 2 hours about this, but yeah. I don't know if Margot or Nicholas have some takes on this.
Yeah, please, if you have any ideas, please feel free to share.
I love food. My background is actually from the hotel school in Lausanne, and I worked a lot as well with what we call, sort of a community supported agriculture, and as well, again, wherever you live, and not regarding the pandemic that we live, but recently we heard a lot of people going back to shop locally for vegetables, but actually it's already there, it's already out there. Wherever you live, especially in Switzerland, there's a lot of different communities where actually the cost of a carrot that is actually next to you is actually even cheaper than the carrot at Micro. So really ask yourself or ask your parents, where do they actually buy their vegetables? And I think this is just one way, very shortly, to sort of disrupt that, rethink the whole value chain. When you spend 1 franc, where does it go? I mean, I'm not saying you don't buy it at Migros, but I mean, check out what are the other opportunities. Be curious about that.
Yeah, there's also, I'm not like a huge expert on agriculture, but I also love food. And there's an app that I used all the time in London. I don't know if it's in Switzerland. It's called Too Good To Go. And it's, restaurants or bakeries and different places that have excess food. And so instead of that going to waste, you can buy it at a discount. So there's so much innovation through technology, as Alicia said, and digital enables us to, one person's waste is someone else's kind of treasure, to tap into our community. And it's funny because that's what would have happened back in the day. I would have said, hey neighbor, like, let's exchange my potatoes for your carrots. And so that we've kind of lost that. And it's nice to see that being brought in through technology. So I think there's so many opportunities in this space. And the other two have talked about also growing your own food. Like, we grow our own herbs, and kind of taking that power to do things yourself as well, if you can, is another positive step.
I'm sorry, I don't know. I know we don't have much time, but I wanted to add, in terms of like agriculture and industry, there's a lot of byproducts of the agriculture in terms of vegetables. And when you harvest vegetables and fruits, you have all the stem or the rice husks. The rice husks are used for construction, or the leaves of the pineapple trees are used for making fabrics, and the cactuses, like the skin of the cactus can be used, or the aloe plant can be used for making leather, and the skin of the raisins is the same. Skin of the oranges in South Italy is used for making fabric. Exactly, Nicholas, I saw if you use that in your watches. I mean, there's so much byproduct in agriculture that is not exploited and needs to be burned, which could be a good thing because then it fertilizes the soil when it's burned. But in intensive agriculture, you have a lot of things that need to be burned. So, I mean, yeah, it's a whole world to explore. I think it's really exciting.
Yeah, it definitely seems like, as you guys said, curiosity and creativity are like the driving forces behind like innovation in these fields, and then using that to increase like the communication between the different sectors on like how they can be used, like the byproducts from one area can be used in another one. That seems like a really unique perspective on how to improve like the economic models right now, because they all seem to focus on just one sector rather than the other one. So that's really cool. Unfortunately, we could only ask one question due to the time constraints, but we'll definitely be sending you the extra questions to each of the speakers, and maybe we'll send a follow-up sooner or later. So I would once again like to thank all of you, for all our speakers, for being so gracious with their time and for supporting the Youth Forum Switzerland. Thank you, our audience, for joining in and asking these questions, and we hope to see you at a live event soon. This now concludes session 2. We ask you to now click on the closing ceremony link on our website and Schoology to finish off today's event. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.